Chapter 6. Ashes. The night air was cold against his skin, cutting sharper with every breath. Aleric stumbled away from the Citadel, one hand pressed against his ribs where the bruises were deepest. The ground underfoot was treacherous, slick with mud and broken stone, but he kept moving. Step, drag, step. Above him the stars blurred through a veil of mist, cold and indifferent. He didn't know how long he walked. Minutes bled into each other, swallowed by exhaustion and the hollow ache spreading through his body. A forest loomed ahead, a jagged line of black against the sky. Aleric staggered toward it, each step slower than the last. By the time he reached the tree line, his legs were trembling with the effort of holding him upright. He pushed a few more paces into the cover of the trees before he finally let himself collapse. The earth was damp and cold beneath him. He barely felt it. He lay still, breath rasping through raw lungs, staring through the tangled branches at the spinning sky, the light of the moons barely enough to illuminate the surroundings. He turned his face into the crook of his arm, squeezing his eyes shut. For the first time in what felt like hours, there was no shouting, no pounding footsteps, no scraping chains. Only the slow drip of water from the leaves overhead and the hollow thud of his own heartbeat. Aleric let the silence soak into him, though it did little to quiet the storm burning behind his ribs. He drew a shallow breath, tasting the damp earth and rotting leaves, and felt the raw edges of the ritual's aftermath tearing at the edges of his mind. He needed to move, needed to find shelter, food, anything, but he couldn't. Not yet. His body refused to answer, pinned to the forest floor by a weight heavier than exhaustion. His fingers twitched once, then stilled. Above him the mist thickened, swallowing the stars in slow, creeping layers until only a dull, sour glow remained. His fingers curled weakly against the ground, and a shiver ran through him that had nothing to do with the cold. He could still feel the unstable magic crackling under his skin, dulled now but not gone, like a wound that refused to close. Aleric closed his eyes, and the darkness, patient and heavy, finally claimed him. Aleric floated in the darkness for what felt like hours, caught in a sluggish current where time was thin and scattered, dreams pressed against his mind, fragmented and shifting, full of cold corridors and broken chains. When he finally clawed his way back to waking, the world felt wrong. His body ached from the cold ground, his muscles stiff and uncooperative. Dampness clung to his clothes, seeping into his skin. The heavy mist still clung to the forest, a pale shroud that blurred the trees into skeletal shapes. For a few long seconds he stayed still, staring upward through the skeletal branches, trying to remember where he was, what had happened. His heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm, sluggish from cold and the lingering effects of the ritual. Then the pain returned, creeping back into his awareness like a slow tide. His ribs throbbed with every shallow breath. His wrists burned where the shackles had rubbed them raw. And beneath it all, the stolen karma twisted and coiled inside him, no longer thrashing wildly, but not settling either. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself upright with a hiss of pain. The trees swayed in the mist, silent and watching. Somewhere in the distance he thought he heard the faint clatter of falling stone, but it was impossible to tell if it was real or if he was just imagining things. He pushed himself to his feet slowly, swaying for a moment before he caught his balance. Every part of him screamed to lie back down, to close his eyes and let the forest swallow him whole. But he knew better. The Citadel might be a smoking ruin behind him, but he had not escaped clean. He took one step forward, then another, moving deeper into the forest, where the mist grew thicker and the broken sky overhead faded into a dull smear of gray. Each step dragged at the aches in his body, and every breath burned like he was carrying twice his own weight uphill. Branches scraped against Aleric's shoulders as he pushed deeper into the woods, branches like gnarled fingers catching at his sleeves. The mist clung low to the ground, curling around his boots, swallowing the forest floor until he could barely see where he stepped. But he did not stop. Somewhere behind him, the Citadel's broken towers still groaned under their own weight. He knew better than to hope that the Empire would let anyone slip away. Someone would come searching, if they had not already. The trees thickened around him, towering trunks rising like black pillars into the mist. The moonlight, pale and cold, struggled to pierce through the canopy, leaving the world dim and shifting at the edges of his vision. Aleric stumbled once, catching himself against the rough bark of a tree. He rested there a moment, forehead pressed against the damp wood, letting the exhaustion roll through him in slow, grinding waves. He could not keep this up much longer. A gust of wind stirred the mist, revealing a narrow trail half swallowed by the undergrowth. It twisted between the trees, barely more than a suggestion of a path, but it was better than stumbling blind through the forest. Aleric pushed off the tree and started down the trail, moving carefully. His boots slid on patches of slick moss, but he didn't fall as he tried to use up as much of the stolen karma as he could. Little by little, the wild crackle of magic dulled inside him, fading into a sluggish, manageable thrum. It was still there, waiting, but at least now it no longer screamed against his nerves with every breath. The path narrowed as it climbed, the trees closing in overhead until only slivers of the night sky peeked through. The two moons hung above, one full, one half-lit, casting a faint silver glow over the twisting trail. For a while there was nothing but the soft squelch of his boots against the damp earth and the mist curling through the trees. He finally paused at a bend in the path, one hand resting lightly against the trunk of a leaning tree. He could feel the toll of the past few days dragging at him. The mist shifted ahead, stirred by a breeze heavy with the scent of damp wood and old smoke. Through the thinning fog, he caught a glimpse of something that made him freeze, the dark outline of a house nestled between the trees, slumped against the side of a low hill. It was a cabin. At first he thought his exhausted mind was playing tricks on him, but as he crept closer the shape sharpened into rough walls of weathered timber and a sagging roof barely visible under a heavy thatch of moss. The place looked abandoned, the front door hanging crooked on one hinge, its frame half swallowed by overgrown vines. No lights burned within, no smoke rose from the crumbling chimney. Aleric stayed at the edge of the clearing for a long moment, every instinct wary. Abandoned shelters could be just as dangerous as open ground if someone else had claimed them. He crouched low, scanning the cabin carefully. The windows were little more than dark slits, most of them shattered. The clearing itself showed no recent tracks, no churned mud or broken branches that might have suggested recent movement. Only silence and the slow drip of water from the trees. After a moment he moved, keeping to the shadows as he circled the cabin once. His boots made almost no sound against the wet earth. Up close, the wood was blackened in places with old scorch marks, and the air carried the faint, bitter tang of charred stone. Whatever had happened here, it had not been recent. Satisfied that no one waited inside, he approached the broken door, nudging it open carefully with the toe of his boot. The interior was as empty as it looked from the outside. A single narrow room stretched beyond the threshold, its walls sagging inward with the weight of years. A stone hearth sat cold and cracked at the far end, filled with the ashes of long-dead fires. A rickety table and one overturned chair lay half-rotted against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Aleric stepped inside, the door creaking mournfully behind him. The mist seemed to pull back slightly as he crossed the threshold, as if reluctant to follow. He let out a slow breath and slid down against the nearest wall, the rough boards cold against his back. His legs finally gave out completely, trembling with the release of tension they had been holding far too long. The cabin smelled of damp wood, mold, and old smoke, but it was dry and it was hidden. Aleric stayed slumped against the wall for a few long minutes, letting the ache in his legs and ribs settle into something he could almost ignore. His hands, stiff and raw, brushed against the cold floorboards, searching automatically for anything he could use. There was no flint, no tinder, no tools. The tools he had once carried were long gone, confiscated during his capture. He crawled toward the old hearth on hands and knees, every movement slow and reluctant. A few broken twigs and scraps of old thatch still clung to the corners of the stonework, brittle with age but dry enough to catch if he could spark them somehow. He tried to reach for his karma to get the sticks to spontaneously catch fire, like he had heard about some of the Empire's vitalists doing. But the currents inside him did not respond. They shifted sluggishly, coiling away from his call, too unstable, too raw. Every thread he touched felt frayed and brittle, as if one wrong pull might tear him apart from the inside. He gritted his teeth and tried again, focusing harder, forcing the memory of fire into his mind. The twigs trembled faintly under his fingers. A wisp of warmth, no stronger than a dying breath, stirred the air. Then nothing. The karma slipped from his grasp like water through cupped hands, leaving only the cold bite of reality pressing in. Aleric sagged against the hearth, his breath rasping shallowly through clenched teeth. He had nothing left to give. The mist outside pushed against the broken frame of the door, curling inward around the cracks like thin, searching fingers. The faint glow of the moons barely reached through the broken shutters, painting long, crooked shadows across the floor. He dragged his torn cloak tighter around himself, folding his arms against his chest, trying to trap what little body heat he still had. His head dropped against the stone, too heavy to hold up any longer. The darkness pressed closer with every heartbeat, slow and patient, until, finally, it pulled him under.